welcome back to the Healing You Show. We have episode 21 today, and we are going to unpack those moments in life when you're afraid to speak up. I'm Vanessa Harris, and our host is Gloria Lybecker.
Hi, Vanessa.
Gloria? Hi.
Good today.
Good.
Yeah, so those moments in life, I just kind of like had a cascade of memories from the time I was a tot to now of all the different times when I would be afraid to speak up. And I want to say that there can be a lot of different scenarios where that could come up. Though for most of us, I believe there's probably an underlying pattern that we just haven't truly tapped into to recognize.
And I'm imagining that for some people that pattern is stronger than others and more frequent than others. And without some people it would be certain situations. I know for myself, speaking up is not something that I've ever had much of a problem with. And so when it does occur for me, I actually find it really overwhelming because it's not something I'm used to. It's
Well, so then I'm imagining too that there's some parameters in that experience as far as what's happening in your environment that is signaling your body that this is that moment that it's not possible to speak up. So we have life patterns and our body doesn't forget a single one of them. And when everything comes into a certain correlation, our body recognizes it long before our mind ever does. We have to catch up with it later. So it's true that it's a relationship with the life experiences that allows that pattern to then be manifest. So when we can slow it down and start to note down, what is the observation about that experience, to begin to recognize what is the pattern that's emerging, what's ready for healing. Because when it starts to emerge and it's really uncomfortable, it means something's ready to heal. To me. Yeah. So some of the things other people that I've worked with have acknowledged is when that fear comes up, what happens to them when it feels intense like that is they go into a type of freeze. So it's almost an immobility. So to me, that would be that there's no escape. So it doesn't feel safe. Because when we go into our dorsal vagal, we're telling ourselves we can't get out, that there is no way out. So then that would be unpacking that for the individual. What does that look like for them? And so slowing time down and really being in the body with that, just that little sliver of an observation and noticing what are the sensations there. And just slowing it way down, titrating it. Because if we try to push through too quick, it can be traumatic in itself. And we don't need to re-traumatize the body.
What was the word you just used then? Titrating.
Yeah, titrating. So, like slowing it down, working on the edges of the uncomfortableness to not overwhelm the system.
Titrating is a word that I only know it from chemistry. Is that correct?
Well, it's a psychological term too. So it's a way of working therapeutically with somebody. You don't want to just go in and go for the punch and blow them out of the water. And you don't want to tiptoe around it and never talk about it. So there's a titration of working on the edges of tapping into something and then coming back out where it's more comfortable. And then you can tap into it and you come back out where it's more comfortable.
So it's like a drip feeding almost, so that it's at a level where it's able to be just processed in small amounts.
Yeah, we want to be able to work with it slowly, yet effectively. So there's a precision that we need to have in our skill sets to recognize all the signals that the body is giving. And so if we've gone into freeze, then that's important to recognize, because that's definitely a trauma reaction. Other times people will just ignore the feelings. They'll get busy. They don't like what's just happened. So now they're going to redirect their attention and they're going to get really busy doing something else. Right. Maybe depending on the setting, maybe they're just going to they're going to turn to start talking about something else to somebody else.
Or
You
if
know,
they're not comfortable, if they don't want to speak up, they'll just go and start doing tasks and jobs.
possibly. Yeah, it could be. Um, they can pretend that whatever happened that they didn't like didn't happen. So they just dismiss it. And so it's a way of disconnecting from the life experience. Um, or maybe they saw it happen and they just feel really grumpy about it. And then they get opposite. They refuse to look at it. So there can be a real powerful resistance, especially if this is a deeply embedded pattern and it's unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's like a refusal to move in that direction. And one that I've worked with is like trauma was at a very young age. And so the little child inside is the one that would get stimulated. And so if you can imagine like a 2-year-old saying, I'm not going to talk. And that would be then the adult version that's happening, but there's no awareness that that's what's happening. Because this little one that was never accompanied actually has developmental trauma and is needing to be recognized, is needing to be invited into relationship that's possible at the timing that that little one can tolerate. So that, again, there's the titration.
So what you're describing there, I'm imagining a situation where the fear of speaking up is ignited by someone being, for some reason, I'm thinking someone yelling at you or being aggressive toward you. That's when I notice that in my world, the 2-year-olds, or if they're being pulled up or scolded, that's when the 2-year-old will.
Yeah, they could be shamed.
Right.
Yeah, so there's many different scenarios that would cause that reactivity. Or maybe they showed up big and large and loud, but they were dismissed or they were ignored and nobody listened to them. So they learned not to speak up. So there could be, as far as what caused it, there's infinite possibilities of what could have caused it. But to recognize it is the important thing. And to begin to respectfully and gently invite something different. Even by slowing down to notice the posture of the body, can start to recognize what's running in me. Well, as you sit there and you have that look on your face, I'm just wondering what that feels like in your body. So, I mean, really gentle, not shaming, or maybe they're all slumped up. It just depends on what's happening. If you can gently bring the attention to the body, I'm wondering as you just sit with this, how this feels within you. And just kind of modeling that it's okay to be right where you are. And so I want to be really gentle and tender with any part that has a fear around speaking up, because you don't know where that thread's going to go. I'm not going to assume that I know, because the person may not even know. And it may not be a big trauma, but it most likely is some kind of a trauma, big T or little t. There's some experience that they had that taught them to have that fear.
Some learned. When you were describing all of that, I was getting a picture of all the different ways that when you're afraid to speak up, that it can be triggered. But when you were talking about the large and the big energy, or, you know, I got a sense of things that I've seen people around me do where they look like they're speaking up, but they're not really. So they might be yelling and swearing. There's a lot of yelling and swearing, but it's just this superficial. They're not really saying what they want. They're not really saying what's going on. So I see it with adolescents. I hear about it reported in school, you know, where they'll quite happily swear and, you know, tell the teacher to get off or whatever, but they won't. When I question them, well, what was actually going on there? What was happening? And then I get the full picture, and I'm like, I'm wondering why you didn't speak up and tell the teacher that. So they're willing to like yell and be loud and swear, but that's not really speaking up. They're not really
No,
saying
that would be
truth.
more of the reaction to what happens. So what do you
Right.
do in the face of that? If you're afraid to speak up, well, sometimes we go into the frustration and the anger, and we get big energy and attempt to kind of blow the energy out of the water maybe. But we still haven't been accompanied to know our own truth, or to know what our needs even are, to be able to name that and make a clear request. How do we name something? And we need accompaniment to discover those truths inside of ourselves, especially in adolescence. In adolescence, that's a whole different world.
Mm.
Yeah. And every adolescent is different. They're not all the same. So each one
No.
has a different experience. But what is the same is they have a lot happening inside of their whole system, a lot of pruning, a lot of new growth. It's just the same as when they're 2. So we've talked about 2-year-olds. Now we're talking about adolescents. Well, then that can also be that experience if it was not nurtured in order to totally integrate into an evolving being to mature. It's still waiting for that. And that I would call, seems to be my new word, developmental trauma. I mean, because as we were developing, when we're not met where we need to be met, and we're left in that state of alarmed aloneness, that part's still waiting to be caught.
Mm-hmm.
And it's shunted into our body implicitly. And the environment, then you get the right scenario, boom, it gets triggered back up. And anytime you had that fear, all of them are kaleidoscoped up in that same instance. So that's the power of slowing time down, to work with one observation at a time instead of ping-ponging around to all the different things.
Mm-hmm.
To stick with one thing and slow it down, and to get into the body and have consent in order to start to really unpack it, because there could be different layers there. Or maybe it's just that they remember one instance in their life when they went to go do something and something embarrassing happened, and then they said to them, I'm never going to do that again. So, that also can end up being an unconscious contract, that they didn't remember that's what happened, but then every time they get up to speak, they're just like, can't do it. So again, when you slow it down, you can start to tap into the body's wisdom to discover what's ready to integrate today. What am I
Wow.
able to welcome home today in this moment?
And when I'm hearing you describe that, I'm just realizing how powerful that is as a learning experience.
Mm.
And a neuroplastic experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also really aware, like even just on a parenting level, what you were describing then, when my children come home and will talk to me about certain situations, and if they're really, really triggered, and that's a repeated pattern that's been happening that I feel they're triggered by, sometimes I'll be like, oh, wait, did you say this? Did you do this? Did you say that? And my daughter's really good at saying, Mum, I'm not like you. I can't think of things to say like you can, and I just don't know how to speak up like you do. And she does go into a lot more freeze. But that's because I'm removed from the situation, and it's after the fact, and I'm not triggered. So, of course, I can think of all of these things to say. And what would be better for me to do is what you're describing there, is have her slow down the moment and just go through an experience, unfreeze her in that moment. And what was she experiencing? What was she feeling? What was it like? And then the words will flow automatically for her. I don't need to be telling her what to say.
Agreed. And to catch ourselves when we have that response, that when we are telling somebody else what to say, is we really want them to be successful in life. We really care about them, and their well-being matters. And we don't have a different pattern to know what we might do different. And what's really different is when we genuinely walk alongside another person, and we are curious about what it's like to be them. And we get consent whether they want to slow down or not. Because especially when you're working with your own children, or you're conversing with them, they most of them are going to, or someone that's younger, if you're in a position of authority, then they may think that they don't have choice. And so for that to be a taught and learned experience too, they do. They are a full and complete human being as they are. And they do need to know how to check in with themselves to know whether this is a place they want to go or not. And by being given that choice, it empowers them to be able to recognize other choices in their life. But if we always are just telling people what to do, then people are always looking outside of themselves for their answers instead of inside of their own heart. And I want to direct attention back inside of each being, because we each have our own source within us. And we don't need any other person to be an intermediary. I mean, they can model how to be in choice that way. And that's what I seek to do when I accompany people on their life journey.
So when you're describing the children and the adolescents, and then I'm thinking about the adults and what you're talking about with their journey, I hear people often talking about a situation that they've just been really confronted by, and they froze or they didn't speak up, and then they walk away, and then they think, oh, I wish I had said this, and this, that. Like everything comes flooding into their mind and afterwards. But what they're needing to do is tune into themselves when they're frozen in that moment.
Well, and most of us, if we're frozen, especially, it's not going to be familiar. So we're needing accompaniment from somebody that does have the skill sets developed, because our nervous systems are going to sync up with one another. And so when I'm working with somebody, I've received tons of empathy myself. I've been held in so many processes, I can't even number them all. But I'm an older woman, so I've got a lot of experience with this. So when I work with somebody, there's a resonant field that moves from my heart field out to theirs that invites them in energetically. It's not all this. The heart field is a much more profound electromagnetic field that actually can change us at a cellular level when we can be present with it. So I'm not trying to fix anybody or make anything happen. It's the accompaniment itself of being with that does the healing. But can we slow down and actually be in the moment and get out of our mind?
Yes. So, but what I'm hearing there is, for people who may be watching this and thinking, well, because a lot of people just want to be able to do something different. When I'm in that moment and I can't speak up, how do I fix that right now? But what I'm hearing is it's not that simple as, right, while you're in that moment, you need to tune into your own body. There's actually a process where you would need to actually be accompanied and experience that with somebody else when you're thinking back on a situation or slowing down a moment that you remembered, and then build up that skill and tuning into yourself, and then that automatically starts to just happen.
It starts to be available. Yeah. It starts to become available. Oh, this happened. Where's my breath? Oh, this happened. What's my sensation? Instead of going up to the mind of what am I thinking, I'm actually resourcing myself from my body, and it's the bottom up process that's going to really make the changes that transform our experience.
But the first step is to do that in a safe place that's not in the middle of right now.
Well, if I'm in the middle of stress, the first thing I'm going to do is slow down and drop into my body and start breathing. And then I can assess, I can start to look around when I get some more oxygen inside my system, slow my heart rate down. I can assess my environment and I can move myself to a different proximity if I need to. But then I'm able to actually be in choice.
But I'm guessing that you've learned to do that, as you say, you described, through having done so many processes and looking and practicing this. It's a skill you've practiced and
yes,
learned.
It's a practice, and these practices are practices that I encourage people to do every day, because when we do them every day, the science says we need to do something at least 21 days in a row in order to lay down that new pathway. And if we skip a day or two, well, then I guess we're back to day number 1. Mm-hmm. So how are we really, what's our heart's desire? are we seeking this? Are we paying attention with intention? Because if there is a pattern that's really not serving our life, there's a level of maturity we get to begin to recognize, oh, well, if I'd like to experience that, then I might begin practicing.
If I want fitness, I need to actually exercise.
Yeah, and that's empowerment, though. Through the experience, we have an experience of what it's like to receive these benefits, because they're very real benefits. That when stress comes up, all of a sudden you recognize, oh, my heart's not racing. I didn't shorten my breath. I'm really curious what's going on here. And it's possible to have that. It's possible to be a resource in the midst of the stress. And I like that much better than going into freeze.
Yes. Yes. And that it is possible to have one of those triggers where normally I have experienced it, where I would freeze and not want to say anything, because I'm in a state of shock, or a trauma is probably the only way to describe it. But then actually being able to go, okay, what's going on? What am I feeling? Where is this in my body? And where is the first time I noticed this? What is this about? Okay,
and all of that being slowed way, 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 way down. And that may be just what we've talked about them in the past, but it's what I call a post-rehearsal. Is I recognize, oh, this thing happened, and I can take the time to journal about it, and I can actually go through a process that helps to illuminate my own understanding of my experience. But it's not like, okay, I'm going to give it 10 minutes, and if it didn't work, I'm on with the next thing. It's a true dedication to practicing a way of being in life, to take the time we need to be accompanied in order to step more fully into those other doors of possibility that are just waiting for us to open them.
And so practicing noticing when you're not speaking up and taking time to actually go through that process means then that you will have the ability to speak up once you've built that pathway, I guess is the way you describe it.
Yeah. Well, first, just noticing if I'm not speaking up, is there a pattern to when it is? What is it that's in my environment when that happens? Maybe it's a certain type of person. They speak a certain way. Maybe it's a certain scenario. Maybe it's a certain time of day. I mean, it could be, depending on the person. Maybe it's a certain number of people are in the room. I don't know. It could be many things, but first just starting to notice, what is the pattern? Is there a pattern? But when we notice that where we actually have a fear and our throat contracts, pay attention to that. There's something there that's ready to integrate. When we're willing to set up a container where we can feel that we can trust it. So it's really important. So we do need trust, and that empowers us.
So when we trust ourselves and tune into our body, and you go through and you accompany people on these journeys, what are the other options? So, okay, I noticed a situation for myself as you were describing that, where I did not tune in to some feelings and things that were going on, and I didn't speak up and say, I need some space. That's probably one of the areas that I won't speak up and say, I find it hard to say, I need space, I need just things for me. Fine to advocate for other people, no problem there. But when it's me, And so I just sort of pushed that aside, felt agitated, and then I went and used other strategies. What are the typical strategies that people will use to manage this situation where they're not speaking up?
Well, we went over some of them. They can just refuse to look at it. So they have a pattern, and maybe it's been a pattern in their family line of dismissing something.
So is that refusing to look at it and ignoring it? Is that part of?
It's denial,
right? And do people distract themselves? Like I'm thinking, if people don't want to speak up and then they didn't speak up, or they don't know what they do, they just deflect, or they'll go and engage in something else, or they'll go and sink their head into the television, or
well, most likely it's released a neurochemical cascade within the person. And so all of those things you're talking about are strategies to numb that pain. So if we notice we're trying to numb our pain, or we're just numbing ourselves, there's a reason underneath that when we take the time to look at it. But we need to be curious enough to be willing to look at it.
mm-hmm.
And yeah, and it can even show up in being explosive at people, because maybe that's a pattern that's worked to not have to deal with something. Is if you get explosive with people, then people get intimidated, and then you don't have to go there. So there's all different kinds of scenarios that can happen when we're afraid to speak up. But the heart of it is when we truly are seeking wholeness within our sense of self, then we're willing to go on that journey of being accompanied.
Mm-hmm.
And it's through that experience that most people, I'm guessing, haven't experienced it, where it feels safe and doable. And if you need a little bit more time, that you can take that time. It's not about being in a hurry ever. It's about being met right where you are in your experience, and learning how to trust yourself to find your own answers inside.
Mm. So as you're describing that part, I'm seeing the connection between resonant language, or NVC, and actually going through that. I mean, that is about wanting to communicate and speak up, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at, I've got to actually be clear for myself. What am I observing out there and in here?
Mm-hmm.
I've got to be clear what I'm feeling. I've got to be clear and able to express what I'm needing. And then the bit that everyone seems to drop off, I know I did, was the clear requests, which for me was the bit that felt like the speaking up. Like all the other part was the preparation bit to the bit which was the clear request, which...
But if we leave the clear request off, then the people we're speaking to most of the time think we're blaming them or shaming them. If we make a clear request, it actually sets the container for a conversation to stay engaged. But most people don't know how to stay engaged in a conversation, because many of us are just told what to do. And so we think it's the end of the conversation, and we've been given our orders. So we're either going to resist it, or we're going to just diminish our sense of self and do what we're told. So those are some large stroke patterns that happen in many cultures. And what I want to get across to our listeners today is that when we can notice, where is it that I get afraid to speak up? And what are those conditions? What is that scenario? Slow it way down to get really clear. Those are your first baby steps, is coming into your own body, or maybe reaching out to somebody that you know has developed some of these skill sets to get a little support. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing you say that about noticing it, where are the situations that I'm afraid to speak up? For me, it's around when I'm worried about being perceived in a negative way. But it's very specific, because there's a lot of people that I don't really care about what they think. I've decided their opinion of me is not important. But when there is someone that I really value, or their opinion I value, or I really, really care about, it seems to be that I care even more, if that makes sense. So the people that I'm closest to and most comfortable with, and that I care about the most, are often the people that I'm frightened to speak up with, because I care more about what their opinion of me is.
Well, and so that would be a perfect scenario to slow down and unpack. And so being able to identify who that person is and what is the fear underneath that, and then actually going into your heart space to kind of check in. What is it that's ready to emerge for healing around that? Because it's not about whether I don't care what somebody thinks about me, or I really care what somebody thinks about me. It's about recognizing I am not what they think. I am who I am. And am I able to be present in this moment? And even if they happen to think something about me, am I able to stay in a conversation to stay present with them now? And then they get to experience who I really am. Or because they think of that, then I go into this whole cascade of a mindset that starts believing, oh, now they think that, then this is a horrible thing. And that's its own tailspin. Can I catch that pattern? I mean, we have so many different threads of patterns that create the tapestry of our life. And there's a true golden one that when we follow that thread, we can stay present and we can start to notice when we get diverted. And most of the time, in my experience, when I notice where I'm getting diverted, it's a familiar pattern, but I just hadn't recognized it yet. And so when I can begin to recognize it, that doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's an opportunity to now traverse into a new possibility. And that's what this conversation's all about, is to open those doors of possibility. We can untangle those nests of fears that we've been harboring and not wanting anyone to see, because it's safe to.
And I know this will sound odd, but as I hear you describing that, I get a sense of fun. Like, it doesn't need, like, wow, there's this ball of wool to be untangled, and there's all this possibility of all these things that we can then do with once that's untangled. But the initial thought of looking at something can be very overwhelming. So it's just about picking around, as you say, the edges, just starting with the bit that does move and that is ready to be looked at. And
let it unfold naturally. And also, I love how you brought in play, because play is how we naturally learn. When it's safe, we can play. If it's not safe, we can't. And so I'm quite playful when that's ready to emerge, because it makes it a very safe container to unpack some of these patterns and to lay down really thick, nice new pathways that support us going forward.
So here we have this thing that is often quite crippling for certain people, this fear of speaking up, these moments in their life where they just feel frozen. But there's actually a whole possibility of, having some fun around looking at this and observing those patterns without judgment and unfolding them and creating a whole new way of being in the world.
Yeah, and there's many different ways to speak up. Sometimes we have a fear that if we speak up, we have to look like that person. And we can have our own unique way that we speak up, and that's ours to discover. Not to be told what it's supposed to look like. It's ours. And that's the fun right there. Yeah.
Yes, and people want to hear your words. I've got a friend who is always deflecting to me, you tell me what to say here, you tell me what to write here. How do I say that? And I'm thinking, I don't want to write my words. I don't want to hear my words. I want to hear your words. I want to hear how you describe it. And
so then we can begin to wonder with them. We could begin to wonder, I wonder what that might sound like. I wonder what that might look like. And we can step into that field of wonder. It can emerge then. But we need to have pregnant pauses to allow that to happen. Yeah.
So, yes. Because I really like the way that this person describes things and expresses themselves. And but then when there becomes they have to, then there's that frozenness that you talk about. And speaking up, actually, now that I've said that, it's not just about words and verbalizing. It can be about writing and putting things down on paper or in an email or
that's another way of speaking.
In an essay. Like I see kids just locking up in the essay writing, because there's something about yourself that has to be seen. You're speaking up in a way, and when you're writing,
there's a vulnerability in that.
Down. Yes. Yeah. So it's not just the verbal speaking up. It's actually, I guess the way we could say, communicating up. There's so many ways to communicate.
Well, so if anybody's wanting to communicate up with me, then I would invite them to reach out to me on my website at healingyoursanctuary.com. And there's different possibilities. If you explore the website, you'll discover several different ones. And an easy way is just to schedule a free consultation and get to have a meetup, and we'll just communicate, see where it goes.
And the other thing that I really like that you mentioned last time, but I think it's worth mentioning again, is the free course. I think that's a really valuable resource. People to get a feel for whether they resonate with the style of the accompaniment that you offer and the way of educating.
It's a way to have a little mini experience about that, for sure.
Yeah. So I think that would be a great step for people to communicate up. I like
That's
that
our new term. Okay, Vanessa, it's been lovely getting to have this discussion with you today, as always.
Thank you, and I'll see you next time.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.